Welcome to our channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our spooky stories. The full moon shone brightly in the sky, illuminating the old wooden house where Marta lived. She always found charm in the solitude of that house, situated far from the noise and lights of the city. Childhood memories spent there with her grandparents filled her with nostalgic warmth, and she loved the peace that surrounded her. On this particular night, Marta was nestled on the living room couch, engrossed in a mystery novel. Outside, the dense forest whispered secrets to the wind, trees swaying gently in the night breeze. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. The serenity of the scene should have been comforting, but for some reason, Marta couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. As the hours passed, the house seemed quieter than usual, making the sounds of the forest seem louder. Marta glanced at the clock on the wall, nearing midnight. She tried to focus back on her book, but her mind was restless, a feeling that something was amiss settling in her chest. Then, from the end of the dark hallway, came a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a faint whisper. Marta lifted her head, trying to listen more closely, but the sound vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the feeling of paranoia. Maybe it was just the wind, she thought, but the discomfort continued to creep up her spine, causing her to glance around the room, now with shadows seeming deeper and more sinister. Marta decided to get up and investigate. With careful steps, she crossed the room towards the hallway. Every step seemed to echo in the silent house, and her heart pounded faster with each passing second. When she reached the beginning of the corridor, she paused, listening intently. Nothing but silence. Taking a deep breath, Marta took a step forward, and the floor creaked beneath her feet, the sound loud and unexpected amidst the quiet. She swallowed hard and continued, growing more alert. Upon reaching the end of the hallway, she switched on the light, only to reveal an empty and ordinary space. Nothing out of place. Marta returned to the living room, trying to convince herself that she was just tired, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave her. Trying to regain composure, she sat back down on the couch, picked up her book, and forced herself to keep reading. But now, each page seemed harder to turn. With the book in her hands, Marta tried to focus, but the words on the page seemed to dance and blur. She felt her heart beating hard in her chest, each beat echoing in the quiet of the house. She tried to reassure herself that everything was normal, that there was no reason for the fear that enveloped her like a heavy cloak. But the restlessness wouldn't leave her. It was then she heard it again. A whisper, this time clearer, coming from the dark hallway she had just inspected. It sounded like a murmur, a low and indistinct voice, as if someone were trying to speak to her from the other side of the walls. Marta froze, her eyes fixed on the hallway entrance. What could be causing those sounds? She slowly got up, each movement measured and careful. The whisper continued, a soft, almost hypnotic sound. Marta felt a shiver run down her spine and took a deep breath, trying to gather the courage to investigate again. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, and she began to walk towards the hallway, her senses on high alert. The corridor seemed longer and darker than before. Marta switched on the light again, but this time the bulb flickered before finally illuminating the space. Shadows danced on the walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move on their own. The whisper abruptly ceased, leaving a dense and heavy silence in the air. Marta looked around, her gaze scanning every corner, every shadow. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. She began to walk down the hallway, her steps echoing ominously. She passed by the bedroom door, glanced inside to find it empty. The same occurred with the bathroom and the office. Everything was in perfect order, but the sense of discomfort persisted. Returning to the living room, Marta tried to calm herself. Maybe she was just tired, her mind playing tricks due to the solitude and isolation. She sat back down on the couch, but now the house felt colder, more hostile. She pulled the blanket over her shoulders, trying to warm herself, but couldn't shake the growing fear. Trying to focus on the book, she forced herself to read, but the words seemed to lose their meaning. It was then that she heard a dry sound, a faint scratching, coming from above. Her eyes widened, and she froze, listening intently. The sound repeated, louder this time, seeming to move across the ceiling as if something was crawling above her. Marta jumped to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever was making those noises seemed to be getting closer. She looked up, hoping to see some sign of what was happening, but the ceiling remained unchanged, only the eerie sound continuing, growing closer and more menacing. The dry footsteps seemed to echo across the ceiling, and Marta felt a chill run down her spine. Her heart was racing, each beat amplified by the oppressive silence of the house. Her breathing was fast and shallow as she carefully climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her feet, heightening her sense of dread. Upon reaching the top of the stairs, Marta stopped, listening intently. The sound had ceased, leaving a heavy silence in the air. She looked around, her eyes trying to adjust to the darkness of the hallway. Shadows danced on the walls, shaped by the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. Marta felt a presence, something she couldn't see but knew was there. With hesitant steps, she began to walk down the hallway. Each movement seemed to echo in her mind, increasing her sense of vulnerability. She approached the master bedroom and, upon opening the door, saw a fleeting shadow crossing the room. Marta froze, her eyes wide in shock. The shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her in darkness. She blinked several times, trying to adjust her vision, but there was nothing there. Only the oppressive quiet and the persistent feeling of being watched. Marta stepped into the center of the room, searching for any sign of movement, but everything was still. The bed was neatly made, the furniture in place, nothing out of the ordinary. But the feeling of terror didn't leave her. Suddenly, a soft sound caught her attention. It came from the wardrobe, a faint scratching, as if something were trapped inside. Marta swallowed hard, her body tense with anticipation. She approached slowly, each step increasing the tension. With a trembling hand, she opened the wardrobe door, hoping to find the source of the noises. The wardrobe was empty, its shelves and hangers intact. Marta felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. Was her mind really playing tricks on her? The silence was absolute, almost deafening. She closed the wardrobe door, trying to catch her breath, when something caught her eye out of the corner. In the bedroom window, reflected in the glass, Marta saw the shadow again. This wasn't an undefined figure. It seemed to have a human shape, but distorted, almost ethereal. The figure stood still, watching her. Marta spun around quickly, her eyes sweeping the room, but there was nothing there. She turned her gaze back to the window, but the figure had disappeared. Feeling increasingly trapped, Marta decided she needed to get out. The hallway seemed longer and darker as she retraced her steps. She felt as if she were being followed, every shadow, every noise increasing her paranoia. Her heart pounded so loudly she could swear the sound reverberated throughout the entire house. She needed to figure out what was happening, or at least escape from the threatening presence that seemed to lurk in every dark corner of the house. Marta hurried down the stairs, nearly stumbling in her haste. Panic began to take over her thoughts, and the need to communicate with the outside world was urgent. She ran to the landline phone in the kitchen, picked up the receiver, and frantically dialed the emergency number. She held the phone to her ear, but all she heard was empty silence. The line was dead. She tried several times, dialing different numbers, but the response was always the same. Desperate, Marta grabbed her cell phone from her pocket and looked at the screen. No signal. It seemed the house was completely cut off from the world, as if something were blocking all communications. A wave of despair washed over her. With trembling hands, she ran to the living room window and looked outside. The forest was shrouded in impenetrable darkness, and the feeling of isolation was overwhelming. She tried to open the window, but it was firmly locked. She tried another window and then the front door, but everything was sealed, as if the house itself was conspiring against her. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. Marta felt trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. With each frustrated attempt to open a door or window, her anguish grew. She turned around, leaning against the front door, trying to think of a plan. Fear and frustration overwhelmed her. It was then she heard the sound of scratching again, this time coming from the walls around her. It was a disturbing sound, like long nails scraping against wood, trying to get in. Marta closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound, but it seemed to intensify, echoing in her mind. Breathing heavily, she knew she couldn't stand still there. She ran upstairs, hoping to find something, anything that could help her escape this nightmare. As she reached the top of the stairs, she heard a low, guttural growl from behind. She spun around, her heart racing in terror. In the dim light of the hallway, Marta saw a figure emerging from the shadows. It was hunched over, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Marta froze, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The figure moved closer, emitting a menacing growl that reverberated through her bones. With a surge of adrenaline, Marta turned and sprinted down the hallway. The creature pursued her, its unearthly growls echoing in her ears. She reached her bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her, locking it with trembling hands. She backed away, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the creature to break through. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. Marta could hear her own ragged breaths and the pounding of her heart. The room felt like a sanctuary, a fragile barrier between her and the unknown horror outside. She scanned the room for any means of defense, but found nothing that could protect her from whatever lurked beyond the door. Suddenly, the scratching returned, louder and more insistent this time. Marta backed away, her eyes wide with fear. The door began to shake violently as the creature outside clawed at it, trying to force its way in. Marta pressed herself against the farthest wall, her mind racing with terror. She desperately searched for an escape route, but the window was too high to reach, and there was no other exit. The door groaned under the relentless assault, threatening to give way at any moment. Marta knew she had to do something, anything, to survive. With trembling hands, she grabbed a heavy bedside lamp and held it like a makeshift weapon. Her heart pounded in her chest as she prepared to defend herself against whatever was on the other side. Just as the door seemed on the verge of breaking, the scratching suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Marta's rapid breathing. She stood frozen, the lamp held tightly in her hands, waiting for the next move. Minutes passed, but the creature didn't resume its attack. Marta cautiously approached the door, her eyes fixed on the handle. With trembling fingers, she slowly turned it and cautiously opened the door a crack. Peering into the hallway, she saw nothing but darkness and silence. The creature had vanished, leaving behind an eerie emptiness. Relief flooded through Marta, but she knew she couldn't stay in the room forever. She carefully stepped into the hallway, her senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat, every sound made her jump. She hurried downstairs, her movements swift and purposeful. Reaching the front door, Marta unlocked it and flung it open. The cool night air rushed in, bringing a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. She stepped outside, the grass cool beneath her feet, and ran into the open expanse of the yard. Marta didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the forest, far from the menacing presence of the house. She collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving with exhaustion and fear. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she had narrowly escaped whatever had haunted her that night. As dawn broke on the horizon, Marta gathered her strength and walked away from the house, never looking back. She knew she would never return to that place, haunted by memories of a night filled with terror and the inexplicable horrors that lurked within its walls.